I want to welcome everyone. I'm so glad everyone is here. Johnnie, loved your book. And I want to thank Brooke for helping us tonight with the Zoom link and the Pat Conroy Center. Thank you.
Yes.
You know, it's been going on 7 months since we've been Zooming, and we appreciate all the help we get from the Pat Conroy Center. And I hope all of you are doing well. Don't know what's going on, but hey, we're all here, and I'm excited. I'm excited. I love the book. Next month, though, I want to tell you, Grady Hendrix will be here on October 13th. And I must admit, I'm not a vampire reader. However, I'm going to expand my horizons with this book. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And it sounds intriguing. Not to mention, Charleston is where the book takes place. And now, for tonight's book, Sisters of the Undertow, written by Johnnie Bernhard. I want to read a little bio about Johnnie. She is a former English teacher and journalist, is the author of 3 novels, A Good Girl, How We Came to Be, and Sisters of the Undertow. Her work has appeared in newspapers, magazines, both nationally and internationally. She has written articles and columns for the Suburban Reporter of Houston, World Oil Magazine, the Mississippi Press, the International Word Among Us, Heart of an Ann Arbor Magazine, Houston Style Magazine, and Cowbird NPR production on Small Town America. Johnnie's entry for Cowbird, The Last Mayberry, received 7,500 views nationally and internationally. Whoa. And I'd like to mention, Johnnie was here in August in Beaufort, leading a writer's group on editing your work. And I understand a great time was had by all. Welcome, Johnnie.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Great to be here.
Go ahead. You're on.
Okay. Well, why do I write? Because since I was a very little girl, I have loved to read. And I followed that career path in becoming a journalist and an English teacher. I was a high school English teacher. I taught American and British Lit. So my entire life has been focused on the written word. Let me say that differently. My professional life. I'm married to my sweetheart for 37 years. I have a daughter and a son. They're young adults. One lives in Ireland and the other one lives in Houston. I'm a native of Houston, Texas, and I have lived in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi probably since the year after Katrina. My husband is a naval architect, not necessarily with the Navy. He's an architect that designs boats. So I've always lived around the water. I love the water. I'm from water people, and I write about that in all my novels. They have the central themes of family, the immigrant story, because I think it's a beautiful story about our country. We all come from somewhere, and I love telling that story as a way of honoring my German, French, Irish ancestors. I also write about our place in the world. If you noticed in Sisters of the Undertow, every single character is looking for home, whether that's emotional home, to be a part of someone's life, or a physical home. That's why I wrote about the homeless. That's why I wrote about the pound, the unwanted pets. And of course, our protagonist, Kim, spends most of her life looking for a place that she is completely at home and settled in her heart. I got the idea, and ladies, jump in whenever you want to ask something, because I'm a chatterbox. I got the idea to write Sisters of the Undertow when my first novel, A Good Girl, came out, and I was very green. I didn't know what to do. My publisher was in a transition phase from the old guard coming in, new guard coming. It was unbelievable. But thank goodness, librarians, the librarians of this country have championed me since day one. Just been lucky with that. And I think the world of these women. That's why I finally paid honor to them in Sisters of the Undertow. But my connection with libraries and librarians began with the first novel, A Good Girl. And librarians would ask me, well, come on, Johnnie, we have your book. We'll set up an author day for you, and you could come in and chat. And sometimes these would be Friends of the Library groups, genteel ladies serving tea sandwiches and wanting to discuss literature. But I had the most unique experience as an author when I was invited to the Biloxi Library. And Biloxi is a very old port town, like a Charleston. Okay, a lot of history. There's a good side and a bad side. And downtown Biloxi has had a very difficult time recovering from Katrina. We tend to associate Hurricane Katrina with New Orleans. Mm-hmm. That's just because New Orleans is a readily recognized name. But that storm really came in dead center between the Louisiana and the Mississippi border. And I live about an hour and 15 minutes from New Orleans. So that's how impacted the Gulf Coast is. It's city after city after city. But Biloxi was truly ground zero. And part of that is we're on the Gulf, and the water is very, very shallow along the shore here. So when you have that tremendous storm surge of 30 feet pushing across shallow water, it makes mountainous waves. And at my house, I'm just a few feet from the beach. I live in a little cottage that was built in 1847. But at my house during Katrina, that storm surge was so powerful, it dug a ditch within my front yard that I could stand in and hold my hands up. It knocked completely off its track a railroad bridge crossing the water and a concrete bridge. That is the power of water in hurricanes. So I love going to Biloxi. It's a historical old port town. You know, water people are special people. They're friendly. They're open. And so I'm invited by the Biloxi librarian, and I just know I'm going to walk in there and I'm going to talk about my first novel, and I'm going to sign some books. Well, I went in and I began looking around, and I saw that most of the patrons were homeless. Because, see, this library is located very close to a VA hospital in Biloxi. And many of the homeless vets live or try to stay within that area so they can walk to the VA for services. And it was a very humbling experience for me. And I absolutely love watching how the librarian interacted with her patrons. She treated them like everyone else. And I was really guided by her. And I thought, well, I'm going to read. And I read to them from the novel. And we shared the cookies that the librarian put out, and the lemonade and the coffee. And we had a great time together. And I realized I was meant to be there on that day. And that was probably 5 years ago. And that was the beginning of Sisters of the Undertow. I knew I wanted a librarian protagonist, but you know, you have to build that flip side. I always tend to write with the yin and a yang. I'm going to present you with one view of life, another view of life, and how those are connected in the middle. And that's the two sisters. The other part of the story that I was very motivated by during this time of the first novel is I was watching CBS Morning News, and there was a very beautiful young woman doing an interview. She was married to an NFL player. To look at her, you would think the very vision of physical health and beauty, perfection, a bluebird. But her story was that she was unable to conceive a child. And I was so drawn to her story and the emotion within her face, I started writing notes and creating another character. And that is the mother, of course, in the story. So I developed the basic characters, and then I began writing their story. All of my novels have hurricanes in them. Why? I've always lived near water. My grandmother, who I'm named for, yes, she's the first Johnnie. She wrote a little book. It was never published. She wrote it in her 80s. It was something fun for the family that, you know, we ran off copies of it at Kinko's and bound it. But when she was a young bride during the Great Depression, she was living in a one-room house in Port Lavaca, Texas, which is right on the Gulf Coast. It's where Beta, the tropical storm Beta, just came into. And everything she owned was washed away. And she wrote in her little book for the family, the sorrow it was the next morning to look out into the bay and seeing her dishes floating in the water, you know, an iron on the beach. It's a powerful way of humbling us and realizing there are things far more powerful in this world than ourselves. So I'd love to have your takes on the novel.
Questions, anyone?
To the sister and the boyfriend survive. Can you hear me?
I'm glad you asked that question, Mary. Everybody asks that question. Let me tell you, so you write the novel, you send it to the publisher, you hope they're going to like it enough to publish it. So that can be a 5-year process. The publisher had it for a year. And eventually I began working with the editor for the publishing company. Dr. J. Bruce Fuller, he's originally from New Orleans, and he's a Katrina survivor. He lost his home, he lost his job, and moved to California and began teaching at Berkeley to survive. Started his life all over. So he's working with me on the end. And my end, being a woman and being the age I am, you know, we like everything wrapped up in the end, the cherry on the top. I'm very much like that as a person. Yeah. I don't like things unsettled. So in the end, I had Kim get a ride back to her sister's house from a volunteer at the shelter, and her sister's waiting for her. And she has some clean clothes laid out for her, and Kim's changes clothes and is on the bed, and she looks to her side, and there are her books that her sister has saved for her from her childhood. And her sister cuddles in bed next to her. And so the book ends as the book began. Remember the first chapter? Yeah. The two sisters share a bed. Night, night, cat, cat. Good night, sissy. And the light is off. That was my ending. Sweet. Yeah. Cherry on top. And he said, oh no, Johnnie. Hurricanes aren't that neat. Especially something like Harvey or Katrina. People are separated from their families. The entire infrastructure is broken down. There's no communication. You may not be reunited with your mother, your father, or your grandmother in a month. It's not that easy.
Right.
He said, go back and
Right.
redo it. And so I have to tell you, Mary, I was crying my eyes out writing the end of that, realizing that Kim had to be knocked to her knees to gain love of self and appreciation of those that loved her. Of course, Wayno makes it. Of course, Wayno makes it. He's such a good guy and so easy to love.
Okay.
It's interesting, and I'm always asked this question, and the male readers love it because there's some anxiety in the end, and there's that. Is she writing a sequel? What's really going on?
Yeah.
But women, we love closure. We don't want any loose ends. So it's been an interesting question. And no, there is no sequel.
Oh.
And I wanted more at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had a question. Her boyfriend that died in water, did he drown or did he commit suicide?
He drowned.
He just drowned.
It was an undertow. And that's a very sad part of the book because I wanted to show the reader this is he was a waterman. He loved the water, but the water he was used to was the Gulf.
Right.
He grew up in Ocean Springs, and remember how I was saying how it's very shallow. I can walk out a mile from the beach into the water and it may come up to here.
Right.
It's not the turbulent depth of the Atlantic. And so in his naivety and his youth and not understanding how powerful the Atlantic is, he went in, was sucked into an undertow, and couldn't fight the current anymore. So it was a tragedy. It was an accidental drowning. Yes, I love that character very much.
Thank you.
He would not have been allowed to leave the barracks to go swimming. Oh, we live where Paris Island is. That's where Beaufort is, and my son went through Paris Island. They're not going to let those recruits. They're waking them up at 2 a.m. to do some more work and more mind games. They're not letting them go out and go swimming. So maybe that's why she asked about the suicide. That you'd have to be very, very determined to get out.
Oh no, there's no suicide there. Well, that's just a little bit of fiction. I come from a military family as well. That's just a little bit of fiction because Sisters of the Undertow. So what is the undertow? It could be the thing in life, particularly for Kim, that is just below the surface, that if we're not careful, we can be swept away in it and we could lose our life to something we're letting control us. So no, that's just a little bit of fiction playing into that.
Do you think she had a personality disorder?
No. I think Kim is the protagonist. I think for anyone, and I interviewed a lot of women that had miscarriages, and particularly spent a lot of time with a woman that had a special needs child and asking her how it affected everyone in the family. Certainly people aren't going to say on the surface, my sister, because of her health needs, and it could be a special needs child, it could be a parent diagnosed with cancer, it could be any kind of illness that requires the full physical, mental, and financial attentions of the people that run the household. And the woman I interviewed about this, she said it was very hard for all of her children. And we all have different personalities. Now, Kim had her grandmother to go to. So at that same time where Kim is getting her mothering from her grandmother and to just have fun and not worry about her mom and her sister, she's just a kid with her granny. Her granny dies suddenly. And shortly before that, Kim's a very innocent girl. She's taken into a vehicle and brutalized by a boy that she innocently thought only wanted to play kissy face and listen to the radio in his truck. So Kim is wounded. And I think some people, when they're wounded emotionally, they find something to hide in. It could be shopping, shopaholics, it could be alcoholism. Kim became obsessed with books and retreating into a world where she didn't have to be judged by the bluebirds. She didn't have to feel guilty about being envious of all her sister's attention. It was easy for her, and she didn't have to worry about being lonely without a man in her life. She didn't trust men. She was hurt. She was disappointed. So she retreated from the world into the world of books. And ladies, sometimes in this day and age, we see children, teenagers retreating from the hurt. Maybe that's in the home, or maybe that's at school. They retreat by being obsessed with video games that they play hours after hours after hours. I think it's a very common way for human beings to survive when they've been hurt and disappointed by others. It's a lot like the story of the woman, and I think it was Doris Day, the actress and the singer. She was married to her accountant for years, and he stole every penny from her. She basically retired from life and lived with a bunch of animals. Why? Just like Kim. The animal gave unconditional love. She had been so used by someone she loved, it just wasn't in her to love a human again, to expose herself again. So that's very much Kim. Very much Kim.
Wow, I gotta think about that.
Yeah. I write, they used to call it literary fiction. Today, they try to be a little hipper. They call it upmarket fiction. And what that means, ladies, in my writing as a literary fiction author, I'm trying to present you, the reader, with universal truths about human beings, meaning that sibling rivalry is a universal truth. So someone in Ireland can pick up this book and say, she's jealous of her sister because she got her mom's attention, or someone in Budapest, or someone in France. So universal themes. It's a universal theme for a woman to be lonely and to be vulnerable because a man has hurt her when she began exposing, not a good word, when she began falling in love with the idea of a boy and girl and a man and a woman. You know, our teen years, when we first began putting ourselves out there for the possibility of love. And Kim comes from a loving home. Her mother and father love her. Her father's a good role model. So her perception of how a man is supposed to treat her is based on how her father treated her, with respect, with love. You know, it is in our home as children where we learn to love and where we learn to trust. Kim loved and trusted completely until the bends, the high school incident, and think about what her grandmother told her. He's a bully, but you've got to stay in the game and you've got to keep playing the game, because if you fold, your life's over. Her grandmother was very wise. So another part of literary fiction is something called magical realism. And Gabriel Marquez Garcia, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1980. Now, y'all remember, I'm an English teacher, so I'm gonna just worship these great authors. He came up with the idea of magical realism, meaning that our ancestors, our ghosts, our mother who has passed away, our grandmother, someone that was a crucial human being to one of the characters, can still be able to guide that character. And it's done through magical realism. It's not that I believe in ghosts and I'm writing paranormal. It's a dreamlike way for this grandmother to stay connected to her granddaughter. She loves her and she's worried about her. She doesn't want her to throw her life away. How many of you were in public school during the time of the SRA reading packets and where they put us in groups? All in the same big classroom, but we were in groups according to ability. Okay, Rosemary.
Yes.
Yes. Sure, yes. Okay, well, we had that in Texas, in the Houston area. And I just turned 58, so that was quite a while ago, but I definitely remember it in elementary. And at the time, I really didn't, when you're a kid, you, especially during those days, you go and you do exactly what the grown-up tells you to do, right? You never question it. And I didn't think about it till years later, how we're all in this big classroom, and here's the bluebirds. They're obviously the smart ones. You know, they're a little mini sorority and fraternity before it even hits. And then you have the kids that can barely read in the same classroom. Can you imagine how those children felt if they were aware of that? So, you know, that's my way of an author of saying, here is Kim, that she's an insecure girl and she's hanging her self-worth on what the bluebirds think about her and running in the right group. Even to the point when she's an adult and she runs into the bluebird in the art gallery, she makes up this big lie. Oh yes, I don't work at a public library. I'm in corporate finance. I fly all over the world. How amazing I ran into you at this art gallery. And we know people like this.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a remark about living in the undertow. Okay? Because the reality is too painful, or you're too vulnerable to accept your reality. The self-love isn't there, that you go right beneath the surface, the undertow of phoniness, false friends, false conversations. So that's why I did all that. Does anybody have a favorite character in the book?
The sister. Yeah, the good girl.
Oh, the little sister.
Right.
Of course, everybody loves her. And she's, how can you not love her? She is the absolute perfect example of unconditional love. And there's a little religious motif in that, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
And so it's also a flashback to when I was in high school many, many years ago. I worked in a small town. I worked at the Dairy Mart. It was owned by a family, and all my high school friends worked there. It had a drive-through. So if you worked on a Saturday night and a couple came through the drive-through about 8 o'clock, their eyes were kind of misty and their faces are glowing, and they asked for a banana split, you just knew they were parking on the outskirts of town. So it was a little gossip then. But the owners, they were a wonderful couple and they worked very hard. Their youngest child was a special needs child, Rusty, and he did the Special Olympics. And it was at the same time that Shauna Na had their own television program, and they were very popular, and Rusty loved Shauna Na. And sometimes if I would close the restaurant with Rusty, we would have to clean up the dining room together, and he would help me mop, and he would turn up the radio full blast, and he'd always go do 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 do, just so full of love and life, despite the physical and emotional handicaps.
right.
So that's why I created that sister. That was in memory of Rusty. He was such a beautiful soul. Just my honor to know him as a kid. I learned a lot from him, a whole lot. He had a bicycle, and sometimes he'd ride it up to the Dairy Mart, had a basket in the front where his dog was. His dog name was Bobo. It was perfect. It was a perfect way to grow up and to learn acceptance for others that are different from us in appearance. But my gosh, I was, as far as soul and his big heart, I was a midget in comparison. So that sister is modeled after Rusty, someone I knew when I was about 15 or 16.
Hmm.
Huh.
Any
Question.
other? Yes.
Uh,
Well, I was
Okay.
going to ask you about the bluebirds and the ravens, and you elaborated on that. And let's see. Oh, I know. Wayne O.
Oh.
So ordinary, so methodical. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, don't we love Wayne? Wayno's great. Okay, any girl would be happy with a guy like that. So, you know, the book is divided into parts. The childhood, part 2, when things become unraveled for Kim, and part 3. By the time we get to Kim in part 3, she begins to soften. And Wayno is a part of that softening. He's kind. What you see is what you get with Wayno. There's no mystery man there. There's no hiding behind a mask. What he says is what he means. He's as steady as the day is long. And he doesn't take her crap, darn it. When she's sarcastic to him and trying to be elitist, he's right back to her. Just exactly what she needs.
Where did you
You're frozen.
You left the jar with your finger in the air.
She's thinking.
someone
Sure.
She probably just needs to refresh for here. Should I answer?
Well, you know, I would wonder why does Wayno put up with her?
Oh, I think Wayno is a smart enough man. He sees past her bluff. That's why he calls her out on it. She's worth saving. He knows she's vulnerable and hurt. Okay.
Yeah.
How does he know this? How does he know what his first inkling is? He's a vet. She loves her dog. Like, she doesn't think he's a good enough vet to work on her dog. He knows she's a good person, but he knows she's hurt.
Mhm.
I thought it was nice how he just, he doesn't really ask her out. He tells her they're going out. All right, I'll pick you up on Saturday at whatever time. And so instead of being kind of, I think if he had approached it, in a meeker kind of, will you go out with me? She would have said no. But I like
Laura,
how
you're
like,
exactly right. I mean, this is a smart man, even though he was a Raven, right?
right.
Mhm.
So there we go about grouping people and sizing them up by the time they're 12 years old. Doesn't work. It's all about the comeback kid, isn't it? So,
And then I wonder if, you can kind of feel her, warming to him, but still reluctant to, I guess, jump in the pool completely. She's got one foot in and he's really great. And when she gets lonely, she goes over there and he's just like, well, if you marry me, you wouldn't have to do this. And so, it's like, I'm wondering, does she eventually?
well, in my ending, won't be a sequel, but in my ending, the ending for tonight is, because women love closure and happy. Okay. She embraces her sister and says, forgive me for not loving you as much as you deserve to be loved. Right?
Yes.
And then Wayno comes over and they have a great meal and drink a lot of wine together. And they start planning their wedding. And the little sister's going to be the maid of honor.
Yeah.
And then I'd be a romance writer, right? I'm really a romantic at heart. But yes, Wayne has to, you've noticed all these minor characters that come in to Kim's life. They're all there to either teach her something or to force her to look at life in a completely different way. Might not always be a great way. I mean, the football player in Lubbock at Texas Tech, but Kim learned a lesson. Not that she deserved that, no matter what she wore over there, because no woman, no human being deserves to be beaten and treated that way. But what Kim learned is to be honest. And she learned to fight back. And she honored the boyfriend that drowned, that she had to say goodbye to by saving that dog and taking care of that dog. And that dog healed her. Before COVID, I was supposed to do this huge fundraiser for the Humane Society here in Mississippi, in South Mississippi. They bought a bunch of books and we were going to have dinner and wine, and what the books sold for would go back to the Humane Society. And I had written a little piece because all my animals are adopted. And I said, what Kim learns that all of us learn when we adopt a pet, we don't save them, they save us. Animals, dogs, and cats, if you have an animal in your house, that's the most perfect example of unconditional love. They just want to be with you. They just want to hang out. So, yeah, that's why I wrote about the dog, the vet, the pound, everyone's looking for a home in this book. Kim's looking for her forever home where she's herself and can be the woman she's meant to be. The dogs want to be adopted, the homeless vet, and I love my homeless vet that read all the great science books, and even Little Red Rambo that liked your cozy mysteries. And that's what I saw when I went to the Biloxi Library. The homeless, especially during heavy rain of the winter, they go to the libraries because they have shelter and they're warm and it's a flushing toilet and they can wash their hands and there's books to read. And that's not just something unique to Biloxi. That is all over the country. Homeless go to the public library seeking shelter and to get services. I did right before COVID, right before the complete shutdown, I did a conference in San Antonio, and from the conference, I was going to go to the San Antonio Library and talk about Sisters of the Undertow. The majority of the people in the audience were homeless. This is our reality today, ladies.
It is. It
It
is.
is our reality. This is the world we live in now. It's not the world of my childhood where I could ride my bike to the library or walk. It's a very different world, a very broken world. Many, many people looking to find their home. Any more questions?
No
I want
questions,
to-
but it was a very nice book. I enjoyed it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, ladies.
Anyone?
Just had a comment. I did like the book a lot, and we've talked so much about the people in it. I really liked the way that you wrote about the places. I've lived in the South all my life, but in fact, I was born in New Orleans, but the familiarity you have with that, you really conveyed that well. And I couldn't help but ask, have you ever been to Denmark?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Thank you, Betty. I'll tell you something I learned as an English teacher, and it was from Ernest Hemingway. And he won a Nobel Prize. So I always refer to the greats, and those are the people I learned from. He said, write what you know. Authenticity of heart. There's nothing worse than a phony writer. Nothing worse. Or a phony teacher. Or a phony whatever. So I only write about places I've been, and I'm fortunate to go there. And I did see The Little Mermaid there. And, you know, everywhere I go, I take notes. And all my books, A Good Girl, we meet a woman, 50, and the last surviving parent dies, and she is the first one to go back to the family home and go through all those memories. Okay. My second novel is about a woman, middle-aged woman that's divorced. Didn't want to be, never saw herself as divorced, and never had a child with her husband. And through several things, she ends up adopting her niece and tries to raise a 16-year-old niece in Houston. And she's an English teacher, divorced English teacher. And so the immigrant in that story is a lovely lady that was a World War II bride from Hungary, Budapest, Hungary. And she's alone. The diverse woman is alone. The daughter's going off to college. They have absolutely nothing in common except the fact that they are lonely, and they become the best of friends. My third novel, You Meet Kim, single woman. I'm working on my fourth novel. Girls, I'm so excited. My heroine is a 73-year-old woman, which society says your life is really over at 50. You begin to become invisible. I started to call it The Invisible Woman. I thought, nah, that's too long. So Hannah is 73. She's just buried her husband, the love of her life. And through a strange turn of events, she lives on a ranch out in West Texas, 150 miles from the border. She's coming back from a church event at night. She realized she stayed too late. She was enjoying the fellowship, big potluck. And she's driving back and she sees a young girl. She doesn't know if she's dead or alive on the side of the road, and she stops. And I want to tell you, my 73-year-old Hannah, she's a champion of that young girl's life. And she comes across some terrible men, but it doesn't stop her in doing the right thing. So I write stories about women. There's always going to be an immigrant piece in it because my husband is a naval architect, travels, and he puts me in a suitcase and I get to go. So I love to share those stories with my readers.
That's great.
I have to say, I really enjoyed your book also. I'm older than you are, but I felt like, I had the SRA and all that. I was a bluebird. I wasn't
Well, Rosemary,
good
that's okay. I'm glad you came clean now that this book's discussion is almost over with.
reading Bluebird. I wasn't the rest of that story. But there were a lot of connections. You have that's basically a Me Too moment that she has with the young man in the truck. And, that whole thing where you don't really understand each other. Talk about failure to communicate. You're not really understanding as a young girl what he's thinking. Even if they tell you that, you're really not understanding it.
Well, Rosemary, you're exactly right. And by the way, I was the bluebird in the reading group as well. And the only reason why is because my mother, who had to drop out of high school to take care of her family, was an avid reader. It might have come from garage sales and library sales, but there were always books, magazines, newspapers in my home growing up. And that's why I was a bluebird reader, because of my mother. But you're exactly right. I was making a tap at the Me Too generation with what Kim went through, because in that generation and before that, you couldn't talk about it. It happened. And you were ashamed that it happened and felt the guilt thinking you brought it on. It wasn't talked about because, like the title of my first novel, A Good Girl, we were told to be good girls.
Right.
Talk about pleasant things. It wasn't until I was 50 that I realized, hey, that wasn't much fun being a good girl. I learned to be a mute.
Yeah, we had a neighbor growing up that it was my parents had a card club, and something had happened with his son, and he said, whatever my son can get away with, good for him.
Yeah, it's a different world.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Well,
I think there are still people who think that, but
oh, absolutely. They're in my neighborhood. Right? Yeah. All over the world, Rosemary,
Oh,
all
my
over
goodness.
the world.
I
Every
really
day.
appreciate
Sure, thank you. Thank you, all of you. Beautiful women. And forgive me for asking, it's that author thing, to keep the book afloat during COVID. I would never tell you what to write, but if you have some time, an Amazon review would help me out as an author. You get so many reviews, Amazon starts advertising for you.
Good.
So,
Okay.
thank you for buying the book. Thank you for supporting me and bringing me into your home tonight. God bless you. And hey, for the girls,
Yay! Thank you.
Johnny, Johnny,
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Johnny,
you
real
very
quick.
much.
Here's a book you might want to get your husband. It's Annapolis. It's Working the Water. You might want to get it for a gift.
That looks like a beautiful picture book.
His father did these in Annapolis, Maryland. I have no connection with him except I bought it. It's a beautiful book.
Okay, Lisa, thank you.
Consider.
Thank you.
Now the Jets are coming again. I got to turn you off.
No.
Well, we better let our sweet hostess say goodnight. It's been a long day for her. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
God bless.
Bye. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Good night, Johnny.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. And Brooke.